One of our next guests is writing about what's happening right now in China in a piece titled, "Why No One Dare Tell China's Xi the Awful Truth. Zero COVID Isn't Working." Robert Mahoney writes this: China's authoritarian surveillance state crushed COVID-19 when it first appeared in Wuhan in early 2020 and trumpeted that success to the world. Now, more than 2 years later, the Omicron variant is running rings around Beijing's zero COVID strategy, and apparently nobody in power dare say so. The very rigidities of the political system built by the Chinese Communist Party are hampering the country's ability to handle the highly infectious Omicron variant with anything other than a game of lockdown whack-a-mole. As the lockdown in Shanghai has shown, it has all come at great cost to the economy and to the individual well-being and liberty of ordinary Chinese citizens. And the author of that op-ed, Robert Mahoney, joins us now. He's the executive director of the Committee to Protect Journalists. Also with us, the former executive director of the Committee to Protect Journalists, now a fellow at the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia Journalism School, Joel Simon. He's an NBC News and MSNBC contributor. Joel and Robert are co-authors of the new book titled The Infodemic: How Censorship and Lies Made the World Sicker and Less Free. Gentlemen, good morning to you both. It's great to have you with us. Rob, let me just have you expand a little bit on what you wrote about China, since it is front and center for so many people right now, because it gets to the heart of the book, which is you can hide information, you can lock people down only for so long until they start to push back.
Indeed. And, you know, China did a good job by its standards of locking down Wuhan back when the epidemic broke out in early 2020. And it stuck with that policy. But what we've seen now is that you've got a system of top-down information. And the people on the ground do not pass up truthful information to the elites that run the country from Beijing. So the Chinese are continuing to impose these draconian lockdowns. 25 million people in Shanghai. That's like locking down the entire tri-state area here in New York. Could you imagine? Sealing people in their rooms. And how long can that go on? You know, the problem that we saw is that information censorship is the real legacy of this pandemic for many countries, because the leadership in Beijing doesn't know how else to deal with this except through censorship.
Joel, you know, if they tried that in the tri-state area for too long, people would rebel instantly. They'd be going outside. They'd be living their lives.
Yeah.
But in an authoritarian state like China, of course, it's a different situation. What is the recourse of the people, of the average citizen inside Shanghai, maybe coming to Beijing soon, lockdowns like this as well? How do you push back in a system that is so top-down?
I don't think they have a recourse, and I think they recognize that. I mean, you're starting to see resistance, but it's sort of small and marginal. And see, the thing about the Chinese information system is, when it becomes mass action or popular action, that's when the government really clamps down. We saw even at the outset of the pandemic in Wuhan, there were a few independent bloggers. We profile one of them in the book. His name is Chen Qishi. He was amazingly courageous. He went and documented what was happening in the city. He was one of a handful of people who did that. He disseminated that information to the world. But as soon as the Chinese authorities got wind of that, they arrested him, basically confined him. They did this to a handful of other independent information activists, and then they imposed their narrative. And that model of censorship and control spread along with the disease from China to Iran to Egypt to Russia to authoritarian countries around the world. And we saw a wave of censorship and information management that Rob and I, together at the Committee to Protect Journalists, we've never seen a global crackdown on press freedom on this scale.
So, Robert, we're also seeing some parallels here with the situation in Russia and the war, where the truth about what's going on in Ukraine isn't getting to at least many of the Russian citizens, you know, if certainly very few. And those that have stepped out in protest, we saw some protests early on, and they seem to have vanished too. Are we seeing a similar model there? And what can be done about this? We're seeing some protest, you know, some uprising in Shanghai, in China. Maybe Beijing's next, but it's not going anywhere.
Right. I mean, the situation in Russia is different in that Russia doesn't have the incredible surveillance capability and social control mechanisms of China, but it does have a lot of power. And what happened during the outbreak is that Putin disappeared. he wasn't seen. A lot of strongmen, authoritarian leaders did that. They were really frightened when this disease came along because they didn't know how to deal with it. So what they did was they cracked down on anyone that departed from the official narratives. We didn't see Putin for many, many months. And then he appeared, you may remember the pictures, in this yellow hazmat suit. He went to a facility and he shook one hand. And a week later, ironically, the person whose hand he shook came down with COVID. So we didn't see Putin for a long time. And what they did is he passed laws which criminalized reporting on the pandemic that went against the official narrative. It's done exactly the same thing now with Ukraine. Up to 15 years, 5 years imprisonment for calling this war in Ukraine a war and not a military intervention operation. So same playbook for COVID as and now Ukraine. And one big difference: there were some independent journalists in Russia in 2020 who brought us news from the ground. In Ukraine, since the Ukraine war, they've all left. There are no independent journalists left in Russia.
So, Joel, you've got containment at a couple of different levels. You've got global containment against the virus. You also seem to have now global containment of the spread of truth. In other words, people trying to actively spread misinformation instead of truth. Which do you think lingers the longest? Which is more dangerous?
I think they feed off each other. What we found in the book was that there were two strategies of modern censorship. One is one which is the one we saw in China, which is a kind of modified hierarchical top-down control and management of information. And the other is called censorship through noise, or sometimes it's called flooding. And basically what that means is we live in a moment now where it's not information that's scarce, it's attention. So powerful leaders, including certainly President Trump in the United States, can actually pump out misinformation, lies that are intended to just confuse people and sort of overwhelm them with information that they don't know how to process. And the effect of this is a kind of censorship in which people are unable to fully participate in public debate and engage collectively around a public health emergency because they're just awash in misinformation and lies. And there was an element of that in this country, but in the book, we also look at similar strategies in places like Brazil and India, where there are these elected autocrats who use this strategy very, very effectively, and the global information system on which we depend was simply not up to the task of responding to a global pandemic. It really failed.
It's such an important conversation that includes the critical need for local media, and you write about this at the local level to look into all of this. The new book is called The Infodemic: How Censorship and Lies Made the World Sicker and Less Free. Joel Simon and Robert Mahoney, thank you both so much.